The Texas Supreme Court has blocked a lower court's emergency ruling allowing a woman, Kate Cox, to get a medically necessary abortion. My name is Dina Sayegh with the MeidasTouch Network. Let's break this down. Now, this is a very disturbing story for anybody who cares about a woman's control over her own body. That's because here in this situation, the woman is still pregnant. We aren't seeing cases like this where the woman is still pregnant and asking for a legal abortion. There's a similar case going on right now in Texas, but that is with a group of women who have had abortions or want clarification around the law. But in this case, she's still pregnant and she's asking for clarification, an allowance, let's say, for an abortion in order for her doctors not to be prosecuted. And her husband. We know that the consequences in Texas are severe for anybody who illegally performs an abortion. The doctor can be imprisoned for life, 99 years to be specific, and fined $100,000. And again, under Texas, this vigilante kind of component they put into the law, anybody can sue anyone who helps her, which means her neighbor, who may not like what she does, even though it's none of that neighbor's business, can sue her husband, can sue the doctors. So she's trying to go about this in a way that both protects her and her life and also protects the people around her, including her husband. This strange world we're living in Texas. The husband can be prosecuted for essentially not stopping his wife from getting an abortion. That's where we are. That's where we are in America today in abortion law. And this is why Republicans are losing on this issue. We saw in Ohio, they lost big on this issue because that's essentially what's happening. A husband in Texas can be, prosecuted or sued for not stopping his wife from getting an abortion. Anyway, so this couple went to court and are saying, because their doctor said it's medically necessary to get an abortion, she wants clarification from the court allowing it so she can go through this legally and not have to deal with any kind of legal consequences afterwards. The court agreed with her and issued an emergency ruling allowing her to get an abortion. Of course, Attorney General Ken Paxton did not like that, didn't like the fact that a woman was going to be able to have control over her own body, and appealed that. And the Texas Supreme Court has blocked the lower ruling, which means that as of today, she cannot get that medically necessary abortion. And I'm going to go into all the lower court's rulings and how and why it's medically necessary for her. This is not going to be the last, of course, that we hear from the Texas Supreme Court. This was just an initial stay of the order. They're going to take up this case and hear the arguments and issue a ruling. This is just kind of like an emergency stay on this part. But for every day that she has to stay pregnant, let's say, even though it's causing her risk, is a harm to her. They will take up this case faster than they do other cases because there's a medical issue involved. But as we know, every day is still a harm to her. So I want to read to you. This is basically what the situation is. She's 20 weeks pregnant. Her fetus has been diagnosed with a fatal condition. The fetus will just be not viable, if she carries it to term and it's delivered, or that it will die within days or hours or minutes. This is how serious of a fatal condition it is. And at the same time, she is having problems with her pregnancy. She's gone to the ER 3 times. She's had 2 prior C-sections. So if she has to carry it to term, she's going to have another C-section. And she wants to have more children. And the scarring as a result of the C-section, as well as the complications during the pregnancy and from any delivery, put at risk her ability to have more children. She has 2 children already, and she wants to have a large family. And so they are putting this at risk. And essentially what her doctor is saying is that this pregnancy has a substantial risk of causing major bodily harm. That's the law. It's either life-threatening or is there a substantial risk of causing major bodily harm to a bodily function. And the bodily function here is her fertility, her ability to have more children. So in this crazy world that Ken Paxton is living in, he is forcing her to carry a non-viable fetus that may actually prevent her from being able to have more children. It is her fertility, it's her ability to have more children that is being put at risk for carrying this non-viable fetus. That's where we're at today. This is how unreasonable these applications of these laws are. When the Supreme Court issued their Dobbs opinion overturning Roe v. Wade and saying this should be a state's issue, they're really saying it should be up to these one or two, usually men, interpretation of what the law is and this unreasonableness of the application of the law. I'm going to talk a little bit later about the unreasonableness of something that's happening to a woman also in Ohio, because this is not just limited to Texas. But before I do that, I want to read a section of the petition that the woman and her husband and her doctors had to file to show that this was medically necessary of why she needed to have an abortion, why she should fall into the exception for an illegal abortion in Texas. And it says that the lower court's order allowing her to have an abortion described what she's going through. It says, the longer Miss Cox stays pregnant, the greater the risks to her life. Miss Cox has already been to 3 emergency rooms with severe cramping, diarrhea, and leaking unidentifiable fluid. And I read that to you, and all of it, even though the idea of the fluids, etc., may be something we don't all want to hear about, is because this poor woman has to put this into a court document. This poor woman who has just been told that her fetus has a fatal diagnosis, already the trauma of a diagnosis like that. And then now she has to put these kind of very personal and private details about what she's going through in a court document because it's not enough that her doctor thinks what she's going through means that she should have a medically exempted abortion. But some judge somewhere has to decide this, and the attorney general has to debate whether or not all those fluids and emergency trips are enough. And if you think I'm just being facetious, I'll tell you what he does say about this. So Ken Paxton doesn't shy away from this. And in his petition to the court to overturn the lower court's ruling, allowing her to get an abortion, says that Miss Cox asserts she has experienced intermittent cramping, diarrhea, and mild fluid leaking. According to Miss Cox, each time she was examined for these complaints by emergency room physicians, she was sent home. Okay, so according to him, shouldn't matter. He thinks, this is where this poor woman is at. This is why women across the country care so much about the right to have choice, because they understand this isn't just about, carrying a viable fetus to term or not. This is about control over women's bodies. This is about a literal discussion about whether or not some of the most private details, whether or not the fluids that are happening as a result of this pregnancy that she's having are enough for this poor woman to get a medically necessary abortion, even though her doctors have already said that to be the case. But he thinks that his interpretation of whether or not those fluids qualify or enough should be more important than her doctor's interpretation. He doesn't have a medical degree, and I'm sorry, none of those judges have medical degrees either. But not only that, but it's frankly quite disgusting that anybody thinks that anybody other than the doctor and that woman should decide whether or not what she's going through is enough to have a medically necessary abortion. And frankly, because the Supreme Court decided a woman doesn't have enough control of her own body, we're in this situation where the type of fluids and whether or not they are enough or whether or not she's sent home as a result of it becomes part of a legal pleading. It's almost mind-blowing in this day and age that that's the case. And, he easily just goes over the idea that the doctor thinks this is reasonably necessary. And he pins to the idea that the doctor says it's recommended and says that that's not strong enough for him. But we know it really isn't about that at all, right? Again, it's about the fact that he thinks that she shouldn't have the right of choice. Her doctor shouldn't have the right of choice to be able to decide if it's medically necessary or not. And if we think this is just happening in Texas, it's not, of course. We all know that. We've seen the news. But there is a poor woman in Ohio. This was the one that just protected the right to abortion in their constitution recently. She is being charged with a felony for an abuse of a corpse because she miscarried in the toilet. And again, you know what? Sometimes I hate to talk about things so frankly, but let's be frank. If this is what women are being charged with, then we all need to know what's happening. That's a very common way for a woman to miscarry. And she, instead of trying to go in there and take out the fetus, she flushed the fetus, which I think is also very common. And they are charging her. This is a 33-year-old woman, Brittany Watts, a woman of color. And she is being charged with a felony in Ohio because she didn't scoop out the fetus and take it to a cemetery and bury it. This is where we're at. This poor woman, the trauma, she's already faced the trauma of miscarrying and now is being charged with abusing a corpse because she didn't dispose of it in a way that some DA thought she needed to. And again, it's the substituting of the judgment that this DA thinks their judgment is more important. And frankly, it's a creative DA who's trying to use any means necessary to punish a woman for not doing what they wanted to do. Even though here in this case, she really couldn't even control the situation. That's the update on abortion law in Texas. I'll keep you updated as the Supreme Court there makes a final ruling. My name is Dina Sayegh with the MeidasTouch Network. Thanks for listening.
Hey, Meidas Mighty. Love this report? Continue the conversation by following us on Instagram @MeidasTouch to keep up with the most important news of the day. What are you waiting for? Follow us now.